Number 6, Santa Clara Vanguard, 1989, Phantom of the Opera. And Phantom Regiment, 1989, From the New World into a New Age. If there's anything to be remembered about 1989, it's that this year had one of the most intense podium races in DCI history. And at the center of it, two corps who, in that summer, belonged to the same story the way two movements belong to the same symphony. You couldn't tell one without the other. So, who are these corps heading into 1989? Phantom Regiment, out of Rockford, Illinois, was a corps that had been living with heartbreak for over a decade. They had a frustrating run of second-place finishes in 1977, 78, and 79. Before falling all the way to 10th place in 1986. That collapse forced a complete reinvention. Michael Cesario became the regiment's designer, introducing the all-white uniforms at the beginning of a 3-year rise. By 1989, Phantom Regiment was winning most of the shows they attended, 27 to be exact. They only lost shows against 3 corps. They came into that season with something dangerous: momentum. Their show was From the New World to a New Age, drawn from Antonin Dvorak's Symphony No. 9 and Slavic Dances No. 1, a production that hit an enthusiastically positive nerve with audiences nationwide. This wasn't a safe choice. Dvorak's New World Symphony is one of the most beloved and emotionally loaded pieces in classical canon, and Regiment treated it with the full weight that it deserved. The show opened with the Adagio, a gorgeous, swelling chorale before a standstill brass blast just before the 1-minute mark that was powerful enough to physically stop people mid-breath in the stands. This was a corps performing at the outer edge of what human beings can make together, and virtually everyone who watched them that summer believed they were about to win a title. Fun fact, this is also where the euphonium line of the Phantom Regiment gets their nickname, aka Buicks. This was coined by a judge who stated, quote, "It feels like a fleet of Buicks heading directly towards me." Now enter Santa Clara Vanguard and the ghost they brought with them. Here's where the story gets strange, and beautiful, and a little haunting. Santa Clara Vanguard walked into 1989 carrying a show the activity had already seen. Their legendary corps director, Gail Royer, had made it plain at the start of the second season: we're gonna do it again. And this time, we're gonna do it right. To understand why that statement carries the weight it does, you need the full context. In the time in between their 1981 championship win and the start of the 1989 season, they had placed second 5 times, including 4 straight years between 1985 and 1988. That isn't a near miss, that is a dynasty of almost, a core whose identity had become inseparable from the word runner-up. In 1988, they performed Phantom of the Opera, based on Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical that had just opened up on Broadway in January of the same year. SCV raced it onto the competitive field while it was still new to the American audiences. The crowds responded to it unlike almost anything that season, and then they finished second, again. So, Gail Royer made a call that had relative precedent in the activity. They were going back. Same show, same music. But this time, they were going to finish what they started. The 1989 version was a revamped second-year edition. New visuals, refined arrangements, and effects that had been deliberately withheld from 1988. Held in reserve for exactly this moment. The most audacious of those effects was saved specifically for finals night. In the closing moments, the baritone soloist, dressed as the Phantom, vanished under a sheet while seated in the chair. While the crowd's attention locked onto the illusion, the rest of the corps ducked behind a large prop mask tarp spread across the field. The entire corps gone. Swallowed by the stage they had built around themselves, for one suspended moment 40,000 people sat in Arrowhead Stadium, wondering where the drum corps had just gone. This was not the 1988 show. It was designed for this night, for this crowd, for that moment. And it worked, exactly the way it was supposed to. When Phantom Regiment was announced in second place with a score of 98.4, they had tied the highest score ever awarded in a world-class finalist in DCI history, matching the 1986 Blue Devils record. The stadium absorbed that. People understood what they had just witnessed. And then, seconds later, Santa Clara Vanguard was announced with a 98.8, a new record that would stand for 13 years until the Cavaliers broke it in 2002. 2 scores in the same minute that both rewrote history. That doesn't happen. The legacy of SCV's 1989 show only deepened from there. Nearly 20 years later, it was voted the #1 DCI finals performance of all time by the fans who selected the shows for DCI's 2007 Classic Countdown Theater event. Not top 5, #1. Both shows belong here, but in different ways. Regiment's New World was, by almost any measure, the most complete, powerful symphonic production the activity had seen up to that point. SCV, meanwhile, transcended the era through their sheer audacity. Two shows, one night. Both deserve to be remembered. The tragedy is that one of them had to lose. The bus ride into the stadium for SCV was silent, except for the Phantom of the Opera soundtrack playing throughout the bus. Their warm-up was quieter than usual. When they entered the tunnel and heard the enormous roar that Phantom Regiment received, they knew that they were in for a test of character. That is not a corps sleepwalking into a championship. That is a corps that understood the weight of that moment and chose to walk into it anyway. In the Phantom Regiment, 27 show wins, 3 years of rebuilding from 10th place, performing with a score that tied the all-time record, performed with the fire of a corps that knew that this was their moment and gave everything they had to it. Both of them did. Number 5, The Cavaliers, 2002, Frameworks. There's a version of greatness that announces itself loudly, and then there's a kind that walks onto the field in Madison, Wisconsin, opens with a single baritone playing 14 notes alone in the dark, and proceeds to quietly dismantle everything the activity thought it knew about itself. This is the 2002 Cavaliers, Frameworks. But you can't start the story in 2002. You have to start it in 1971, because the corps that built this show also helped build the stage it was performed on. Don Warren founded the Cavaliers in 1948 as a Boy Scout drum corps in Chicago's Logan Square. By 1971, he was one of the most respected directors in the activity, and one of the most frustrated. The veterans organizations that ran competitive drum corps at that time, the VFW and the American Legion, operated under archaic rules that stifled artistic ambition at every turn. Rigid instrumentation, parade formations, military inspection routines, repertoire restrictions. Warren, alongside Jim Jones of the Troopers, convinced the directors of the Blue Stars, Madison Scouts, and the Santa Clara Vanguard to form a coalition, the Midwest Combine. That would bypass the veterans organizations entirely, package these elite ensembles together, and market them directly to show promoters. In October 1971, that coalition officially established Drum Corps International, branding itself as the marching music's major league. The inaugural DCI World Championship was held the following year in Whitewater, Wisconsin. The man who helped build DCI from scratch was the same man who built the institution that 31 years later would produce the highest score in history. The Cavaliers weren't just participants of the activity, they were the architects of it. Their path to 2002, though, had its own scar tissue. On the verge of shutting down entirely in the early 1980s, the Corps was reinvigorated by a new sponsorship from the village of Rosemont and a complete organizational recommitment. They moved from a 10th place Corps in 1981 to a top 3 finisher by 1986, a championship in 1992, another in 1995, a tie for first in 2000, and an outright title again in 2001. By the time the 2002 season had arrived, the Corps that had survived collapse, rebuilt with discipline, and arrived at the top of the activity with a specific hunger for an institution that remembered what it felt like to nearly not exist at all. The three-peat was the goal, and to get there, program coordinator Scott Coder and the design staff understood they couldn't iterate, they had to reinvent. The concept that emerged from the October 2001 planning meeting was unlike anything the activity had seen. Rather than arranging a Dvorak symphony or building around a Broadway production, the Cavaliers chose as their subject the literal architecture of music itself. 3 movements: melody, harmony, rhythm. The working title was The Elements of Music and Design, which, as the story goes, became Frameworks, after DCI writer Michael Boo suggested the name offhand during a conversation at the annual business meetings that winter. Framework, a basic arrangement, form, or system, a basis for something that is being constructed. Fit the show's philosophy so precisely it sounded like it had been planned all along. What made this genuinely radical, and what the legacy has proven was a watershed moment for the entire activity, was the decision to commission entirely original music. No borrowed symphonic themes, no recognizable film scores. Richard Saucedo wrote the brass book, Britt Kuhn wrote the battery, Eric Johnson wrote the front ensemble, and crucially, drill designer Michael Gaines. Michael Gaines was generating the visuals first, with the music written to interlock with the geometry mathematically, rather than the other way around. When the brass block tumbled and locked into a form during movement 1, the phrasing resolved on the exact microsecond the performers halted their 2.5-yard lateral jumps. That level of synchronization isn't possible with pre-existing music. You can't retrofit Brahms into that exact precision. You have to build the whole thing together from the ground up. And that's exactly what they did. This was the show's first act of transcendence. Movement 1 opens with that baritone solo, 14 notes. No harmonic support, no rhythmic context, just pure melodic line hanging alone in the air over Camp Randall Stadium. The fragment passes to the trumpets, who expand it, ornament it, chase it into a fugue. Multiple melodic lines weaving through each other in a strict counterpoint. The drill evolving with them like oil spreading over water. What struck audiences and judges wasn't the volume, and this is the thing that still gets talked about. It's the volume rarely got loud in the conventional sense. The Cavaliers pulled people forward in their seats rather than pushing them back. In an activity that had long conflated decibel output with excellence, this was a statement of a completely different order. The Corps was telling the audience, pay attention. Movement 2 turned the show inward, harmony. Large portions of the brass book were performed facing the backfield, deliberately, so the sound traveled to the back of the stadium and reflected forward, enveloping the crowd in a natural reverberation. The brass line lined up in a long, contiguous arc to physically simulate the structure of a pipe organ, torsos turning in a wave to pass the harmonic progression up and down the line before the entire ensemble snapped forward and resolved into a single major chord. One witness described the audience collectively holding its breath until the resolution arrived. Another described it as the purest essence of musical magic. Then came the third movement, rhythm, and Fight Club. The transition was signaled by a woodblock striking and a haircut rhythm. A moment of pure, almost impish wit after all that architectural grandeur. The battery took over, relentless and driving, while the color guard formed a rigid square on the field. The brass players stopped playing conventionally and began tapping their valve casings rhythmically with their hands, clicking, metallic, percussive. While shouting out the counts of the meter. And then, as DCI's own account put it, all hell broke loose. Dance and macho strutting and physicality that the activity had simply never seen from a brass line. For an all-male corps, it was the fullest expression of everything that their identity had meant. Not aggressive for aggression's sake, but joyful, athletic, and completely alive. The musicians became the visual program. This was a permanent shift of the design language in the entire art form. The Cavaliers debuted the show on June 14th in Racine, Wisconsin, hosting a 74.75 and defeating the Colts by over 10 points. Then, in late July in Alton, Illinois, a show where the drum majors had to borrow a conducting podium from the Bluecoats, the Cavaliers broke 90 for the first time that season. Over the course of the full season, the Cavaliers went head-to-head with the Blue Devils 11 times, the Cadets 10. The margin was never less than a point. This was not a dynasty by accident. This was a systematic dominance. The finals were held, of course, at Camp Randall, DCI's 30th anniversary, just a few dozen miles from Whitewater where it all began in 1972. In quarterfinals, the Cavaliers scored 98-7, 1/10 of a point shy of SCV's 13-year-old record. In semifinals, they hit it, 99.05, officially breaking the record that had stood since 1989. And on finals night, they performed Framework's One Last Time, scoring a 99.15, setting the all-time record for the second time in the same championship week. In an activity where hundredths of a point decides seasons, they won finals by nearly 2. A show built on the fundamental elements of music, written from scratch, for this corps, for this season, for this stage, performed undefeated across an entire summer against the best competition in the world, breaking the all-time scoring record twice in 1 week in a city where the activity was born, 30 years after the corps founder helped create it. The Cavaliers' reign of terror in DCI was in full swing. Number 4. Bluecoats, 2016. Down Side Up. Earlier in the list, when we discussed it in the last video, we talked about Tilt, Silver Medal, 2014, a show that gave the activity permission to be braver. Then, in 2015, the Bluecoats fielded a show called Kinetic Noise. That pushed the electronics and spatial design even further. 2 years of testing, probing, proving. The Bluecoats stopped asking for permission. Down Side Up, 2016, this was the year that everything changed clothes. That's not a throwaway line. The most visceral, immediate, and controversial thing about the Bluecoats did in 2016 had nothing to do with the music or the props or the choreography. It happened the moment they walked onto the field. 44 years of military-style blue tunics, bibber trousers, cross belts, and shakos, gone. Replaced by the form-fitting white bodysuits with asymmetrical blue and black patterns, no headgear, no restrictions. Nothing between the performer's body and what the show demanded of it. For a corps named to tribute the retired police officers of Canton, Ohio, whose entire aesthetic identity had been built around that uniform since 1972, this was an act of complete institutional reinvention. The traditionalist community reacted exactly the way you'd expect. This wasn't drum corps anymore. This was Winter Guard International on a football field, at least from the costuming standpoint. You can't just abandon the uniform and call it innovation. The activity has standards. So they say. Well, the Bluecoats answered the question, and they answered it with a championship. The uniform change wasn't just cosmetic. It was structurally necessary. It was a visual concept. You see, it came from a British contemporary dance called Motion House and their 2009 production Scattered, built around a massive curved architectural wall against which dancers climbed, slid, and moved in ways that erased the line between dance and acrobatics. The Bluecoats asked, what if the field wasn't flat? What if the performers moved through the space vertically, in 3 dimensions, instead of just across it? The answer was a massive set of modular red fiberglass ramps on wheels, repositioned throughout the show by the members themselves, turning 100 yards of turf into a living, shifting stage. Performers scaled them, slid down them, leapt between them, caught equipment tossed blindly from behind them. You can't do any of that in a wool tunic and a shako. The choreography just didn't suggest the costume change, it required it. The uniform and the vision were simply incompatible, and the Bluecoats chose the vision. The music was deliberately eclectic, as everything else. Hungarian percussion chamber music rooted in Ugandan Amadinda techniques, Pat Metheny's driving Latin jazz, a piece drawn from Hindu and Buddhist iconography, Pink Floyd's The Great Gig in the Sky as the ballad with the flugelhorns, carrying Claire Torrey's wordless vocal anguish, and a barn burner closer built around a Barcelona ensemble fusing traditional flamenco with hip-hop and DJ scratching. None of this had any business existing within the same 11-minute span, but it just worked. It worked really damn well. show opened in complete silence before a single percussionist began clapping in syncopated flamenco rhythm on a ramp, and it closed with performers scaling those ramps at full sprint, catching blind rifle tosses, the brass landing the final chord with the last breath that they had. They debuted the show June 23rd and led the season for 25 of their 29 competitive appearances. The race with the Blue Devils and Carolina Crown stayed tight all summer, all three cores within fractions of most nights.
What you say?
Crown winning the best brass for the season, with the Blue Devils owning individual visual captions. On finals night in Indianapolis, the Bluecoats scored 97.650, 4/10 of a point between first and second. But the win wasn't built on sweeping captions, it was built on general effect, where all four judges gave them first place. The show that moved people the most won. That's the argument the Bluecoats made, and the judges agreed.
Again, the points don't matter, but the 2016 Bluecoats currently hold the record for the lowest season opening score to have gone on to eventually win a world championship. They started the season at a 69.7, ultimately jumping an entire 27.95 points throughout the season. Not that it matters, but it's just a fun fact.
The championship is almost secondary to what happened next, because in the seasons following 2016, virtually every corps in DCI began migrating away from the traditional uniforms toward bespoke, athletic, show-specific costuming. Not because anyone mandated it, but because Downside Up had proven that the old dress code and the new ambitions of the activity were no longer compatible. And that the judges and audiences would reward corps willing to make that call. The floodgates were opened, and they have not closed. Go look at any DCI finals on the field today, count the shack goes. Yeah, the Bluecoats, they did that. That's the transcendence argument right there. The show didn't just win its era, it ended one and started another. An entirely new aesthetic vocabulary for what drum corps performers could look like, move like, and the space that they occupy. Traceable back to one corps in Canton, Ohio, deciding that the uniform they'd worn for 44 years was no longer the right tool for the job. And they would go on to win gold again in 2024 with Change Is Everything, pushing their all-time high score to a 98.75. That's a story for a different time, but it does start here. Downside Up is the origin, the show that brought the door down. This was the Bluecoats' very first DCI gold medal. They were finally a part of the winner's circle. So I only ever marched a single season in 2010. I have only ever been to DCI finals since then one time. That one time was in 2016. Having been there to witness the Bluecoats make DCI history, their first championship win, was incredible. You know, one of the pillars being that competitive fire, seeing these kids out here disrupting the activity with the design choices, playing their guts out to achieve that top podium. It is a moment in my life that I simply will never forget. The the electricity inside that stadium that night was unbelievable. I think it was actually one of the better years of drum corps in the last decade. And whatever your thoughts are on the costuming changes versus traditional uniforms, when you witness kids performing at the top of their game in the pursuit of perfection and excellence, there's nothing like it. On that note, it's really nice and cute and fun to watch DCI on your computer or your TV, but there is nothing like seeing drum corps in person, and there's nothing like watching drum corps live on finals night. If you have the means, ability, or even a little bit of interest, I highly recommend you make the effort to go to Indianapolis in August. It is well worth your time. It is well worth your money. I'll leave you with my personal clip that I took that night of their encore run of the Bluecoats downside up. Again, nothing was like being there in person. The electricity, the energy. I mean, it was absolute cinema. Number 3, Santa Clara Vanguard. 2018, Babylon. A championship show is lightning in a bottle. You can have the right concept and the wrong performers. You can have the right performers and a design that never fully coheres. You can have everything clicking in July and fall apart in August when the lights get brightest. What separates the truly great ones, the ones we're still talking about decades later, is the rarest of convergences. The right idea, the right design architecture, the right staff, and most importantly, the right group of performers, so locked in, so completely inside what they are doing, and the whole thing feels inevitable from the first note to the last. Enter the Santa Clara Vanguard 2018. This was that, in every possible way. Exactly that. I'll be upfront and I'll be honest. This is one of my personal favorite shows of all time, not because of the score, not because of the championships, but because when I watch it back, years removed, no stakes, no season narrative attached, it still hits like a freight train. It is, to me, a perfect encapsulation of what modern drum corps is at its absolute best, and I wanted to make a case for it properly. The Santa Clara Vanguard, founded in 1967 from a split within the Sparks Drum and Bugle Corps in California, is one of the 13 founding members of DCI itself. 6 championships, the first in 1973 and the most recent before 2018,
being a tie in 1999. What followed that 1999 title was nearly 2 decades of sustained excellence and sustained heartbreak. Consistently near the top half, but consistently seeing the gold and the podium go somewhere else. Their 2017 show, Ouroboros, earned them their 8th second-place finish. Their institutional patience with near misses rivals only Phantom Regiments, and like the regiment in 1989, by 2018, the hunger had become stifling. Then second-year artistic director Michael Gaines sat down to design a show and looked at what he had in front of him. In his own words, quote, "In considering a direction for the 2018 program, we had to look no further than the performers themselves. They are powerful communicators and masterful at using this art form to reveal themselves and their passion for performance to the audience. Once we realized the level of talent and drive in the 2018 Vanguard membership, it became apparent that the Babylon concept would be a perfect fit," end quote. The concept was the Tower of Babel. The story of Babylon follows a united society riddled with greed, building a tower to the heavens in an attempt to gain ultimate power. When God became displeased, he destroyed the tower, scattered the language of the Babylonians across the world so they had no method to communicate. And despite having innumerable resources to communicate today, we still struggle with the same punishment. Gaines and visual coordinator Andy Toth urbanized the myth. Not ancient Mesopotamia, but a modern cityscape. All hard angles and crowded energy, built with the physical environment to match. 24 modular nesting cube stages engineered in 4 different sizes, repositioned throughout the show by performers themselves. Literally assembling and dismantling the city of Babel before the audience's eyes. The stages weren't a backdrop, they were the argument. Like the Bluecoats in 2016, they abandoned their traditional iconography. No more Aussie hats. It was set aside in favor of urban, futuristic costuming that let the performers inhabit the world that they were building. Let's talk about the ballad. At the heart of the production, My Body is a Cage by Peter Gabriel, a piece that percussion caption head Paul Rennick described as having, quote, "something in there that was a seed for the entire show," end quote. Originally recorded by Arcade Fire, reimagined by Gabriel, with spare orchestra and choir, the SCV arrangement placed the emotional weight in a baritone and trumpet duet, 2 voices in conversation, the musical embodiment of the show's entire thesis about communication and connection. The horn line built a wall of sound beneath those soloists that made the ballad feel like something physical happening to you, rather than something you were simply watching. One performer described being caught between the sound of the corps and the roar from the stands as something indescribable. Another performer reflected on this simply, quote, "seeing everyone on the field pushed to the very end of the production and hearing everyone in the crowd leap out of their seats before we were even halfway done was beyond anything I'd ever experienced as a performer," end quote. The crowd wasn't waiting for the show to end before it reacted. It was erupting right in the middle. That's the winning spirit. It doesn't require any further elaboration. You are not a core executing a production, you are a core inside an experience, and you've taken 40,000 people with you.
The competitive track reflects it all. SCV led from the first regional in Stanford in late June, held first place all the way up through Indianapolis, and on finals night scored a 98.625, the highest score in the Corps' history. The repertoire they were asked to execute was not kind. Peter Graham's brass band masterworks, Journey to the Center of the Earth and Metropolis 1927, are technically ferocious. Graham writes for the upper limits of what brass instruments can do, and SCV's horn line treated those passages not as challenges to survive, but showcases to dominate. The percussion section under Paul Rennick completed a three-peat for the Fred Stanford Award. A near clean sweep of every caption the activity offers, it was their first World Championship title since 1999. Here's what separates Babylon from every other conceptually ambitious show of that era: the horn line. And the 2018 SCV horn line was, in my opinion, one of the meanest, most complete brass sections this activity has seen in the last 20 years. What Scott Coder and the rest of the program coordination team managed to put together: two modern brass band masterpieces, a rock ballad with poignant lyrics, a trap music hit to work together cohesively, naturally, all in the same show. That is not a show designed to win captions, that's a show designed to be complete. And it was. That was the bottle. Babylon was the lightning. Number 2. Phantom Regiment, 2008. Spartacus. There are shows that win championships, and then there are shows that mean something to the activity, to the people that watch them, and the people who came after them. Phantom Regiment 2008 is a show that proved, at the highest possible level, that the oldest traditions in the activity don't just survive the modern era, they can conquer it. To understand what Spartacus meant, you have to understand what the Phantom Regiment was carrying into this summer. Founded in Rockford, Illinois in 1956, originally called the Rockford Rangers, this is a corps that has never once been confused with anyone else. white jackets and pith helmets, the dark symphonic brass sound, the all-classical repertoire that Jim Wren built from scratch in the 1970s, artistic ideology, practical revelation. Full orchestral scores already had the harmony, the voicing, the architecture you needed. You just had to be good enough to play them. Wren was. The core that grew up around his arrangements were. And yet, for all that history, for all of those decades of being one of the most recognizable cores in the world, Phantom Regiment had won a DCI title exactly once, and it was shared. A tie in 1996. The 1989 heartbreak was still a part of the institutional memory. The near misses of the intervening years were still a part of the story. By 2008, Regiment had been a finalist every single year since 1974. They were never not dangerous, they just had never fully closed the deal. The design team, program coordinator Dan Farrell, who had marched with the Corps in 1972, brass arranger J.D. Shaw, and percussion arranger Paul Rennick, sat down and chose Aram Khachaturian's Spartacus as the vehicle, not for the first time. Regiment had touched the material in 1981 and 1982, but 2008 was different. This wasn't a Corps revisiting familiar ground. This was a Corps deciding that the story of the Thracian slave who led the rebellion against the full force of the Roman Republic was the right story for a drum corps that had been knocking on the door of a championship for 30 years. The show they built around that idea is one of the most complete, most theatrically coherent, most emotionally devastating productions this activity has ever seen. It is a juggernaut of art. The musical architecture was vast. Khachaturian's ballet at the core, the adagio for Spartacus and Phrygia as the emotional anchor, the love theme that made the violence around it unbearable by contrast. Richard Strauss's Ein Heldenleben woven through the heroic passages, the hero's battlefield in particular, chaotic, overlapping brass fanfares, rhythmic fury, perfect for a corps whose brass section could make those chords feel like walls collapsing. Alberto Ginestra's Toccata Concertata from his Piano Concerto No. 1 as a percussion feature, a piece of such raw, hammering rhythmic brutalism for which Paul Rennick turned into the show's battle sequence, with a battery section that was already one of the best in the activity. And binding the transitions together, Loris Janknavorian's Danses Fantastique and René Dupre's score from Cirque du Soleil's Ka, providing the show's darker cinematic passages between movements. But here's what the score sheets can't capture. This show was theater, genuine, committed, full production, in a way the activity had rarely attempted at that level. The dead time before the judging began was used to set the scene. Roman soldiers brutalizing the enslaved, the visual narrative starting before anyone was officially watching.
Rockford, Illinois, Phantom Regiment!
The drum major conductors, Koji Murray and Will Pitts, weren't timekeepers. They were characters. Pitts in particular was the commanding Roman figure, central to the drama, conducting the show from the inside of the story rather than above it. And then the ending. The avenging Spartacus drum major put his spear through the drum major. Pitts fell. Koji stepped up to the podium, conducted the final measures while Pitts lay under the death shroud. Still in character, dragged to the award ceremony, the corps and the crowd began to chant simultaneously. Not because it was choreographed into the audience, because 40,000 people were so completely inside that show that they couldn't help themselves. That moment is not a drum corps moment. That is this activity at its fullest possible expression. Of what can be done when every element, music, visual, narrative, performance, is unified by a single emotionally enormous idea. The competitive track was a story of late season momentum, the likes in which the activity rarely sees. Through June, the regiment was dangerous but not dominant. The Cavaliers led early. The Blue Devils were quietly building a 24-show winning streak through the summer. By quarterfinals, Regiment sat third, nearly a full point behind the Blue Devils. Then, in semifinals, they moved to second, cut the margin to .375, and on finals night, they delivered the performance of their lives. The Blue Devils, 98.1, Phantom Regiment, 98.125. 25,000th of a point, the smallest margin of victory in DCI history. A record that still stands. Look at how it happened, caption by caption, and you see a corps that refused to yield a single inch on the things it was great at, while simultaneously closing gaps everywhere it had been behind. Paul Rennick's battery scored a perfect 20, finishing first in percussion in quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals, winning the Fred Stanford. The brass won music effect. The visual gap with the Blue Devils, .55 in semifinals, was .05 by finals night. That is a corps that peaked with surgical precision at the exact right moment. The Blue Devils that year were performing constantly risking absurdity. Avant-garde, abstract, beat poetry, exploration, the two shows that met on final stage could not have been more philosophically different. One was reaching towards the future, and one was perfecting the tradition. And the judges recognized both as equally valid expressions of excellence at the championship level. That speaks to what the activity is capable of holding all at once. The transcendence argument for Spartacus is clean. In one era where the activity was actively rewarding deconstruction of conceptual novelty, Phantom Regiment proved that melody, narrative, and classical architecture could still walk into the room and take the title, not by ignoring the present, by being so completely, so masterfully themselves that the present had to make room. I marched 2010, Phantom Regiment, 2 years after this show. Spartacus wasn't history when I got there. It was still present. Still the standard the Corps was measuring itself. Still the thing people talked about as the proof of what the organization was capable of. It wasn't nostalgia. It was aspiration. And I suspect it still is, for every regiment member who came after. Here's the thing that I always come back to. The thing that gives this win a weight beyond even everything I've just described. It wasn't just the smallest margin in DCI history. It wasn't just the most theatrical show the activity had seen. It was the last finals held outside, because 2009 brought Lucas Oil. And with that came the full accelerating embrace of electronics, synthesizers, and amplifications that would reshape the design language of every core that followed. The activity that emerged from that era, the one that produced Tilt, Downside Up, Babylon, is a different activity than the one that walked into Bloomington in August of 2008. Not better or worse, but different. A new chapter, with new rules and new possibilities. And the last show to win before that chapter opened was a corps in white jackets, playing Khachaturian, with a slave rebellion and a spear through the drum major and 40,000 people chanting in unison in the dark. No synthesizers, no pitch bends or speaker arrays, just brass, percussion, and the oldest story in the repertoire. The one about what happens when people who have nothing left to lose decide to fight. What more fitting way to close the book? Spartacus, the total package. The last word on one era, and the standard every era since has had to answer for. Number 1, Star of Indiana, 1993. The music of Barber and Bartok. Winning is evidence of something, proof that all the variables aligned, that the show was complete enough and clean enough, resonant enough to sit on top of the entire activity on the biggest night of the year. But I want to close this list with a different kind of show, a show you're probably familiar with, a show that finished second, one that lost by 1/10 of a point, one that the activity has spent 30 years trying to fully reckon with, and, in my opinion, still hasn't. This is the most important show in the history of Drum Corps International, and I want to make the case for why importance and greatness aren't just related, sometimes they are the same thing. Founded in Bloomington, Indiana in 1984 by a medical device magnate, Bill Cooks, the Corps was launched with $1 million grant from the Cook Group, an act of capitalization so unprecedented that it generated immediate, lasting resentment. While other corps were feeding their members rice and ground beef on the road, Star members were eating steak during finals week. While other corps charged thousands in dues, Star charged $200. The, quote, old-timer hate was real, vocal, and kind of understandable. The Corps responded to it the only way that mattered. They went out and performed. In their first season, 1985, they made DCI finals, only the second Corps in history to do that, in their inaugural year. In 1990, they finished third. In 1991, with a show built around Respighi's Roman images and visual designs by George Zengali, who was then battling fatal health complications, designing at the outer edge of what his body would allow, they won the DCI World Championship. Zengali's flex drill and pin chain techniques, fluid and organic, utterly unlike anything the activity had seen. Changed what everyone thought drill could be, and then he was gone. By 1993, the Corps had something to prove, of a different kind. Not that they could win, they had done both. What the 1993 Star of Indiana was trying to prove was that this activity, the thing that they loved, could hold something genuinely difficult. Something that asked the audience to meet it rather than the other way around. They chose Samuel Barber's Medea Ballet Suite and Bela Bartok's Music for Strings, Percussion, and Celesta, and they built around them one of the most uncompromising artistic statements the competitive marching arts had ever seen. The show opened not with walls of brass, which is what most corps did, but with a lone xylophone. Pained and searching, the brass was present, the brass was locked. The design staff made the deliberate choice to withhold what the audience came in expecting, to build a pressure that had nowhere to go yet. For an activity trained to respond to volume, this was almost a provocation. The color guard carried bare metal poles and industrial constructions that looked like roofing trusses. No flags, no silk, no color. Not for the first 3 minutes. The drill relied on scaling triangles, shapes with no equal sides and no equal angles. Visually unstable by design, mirroring the psychological disintegration at the center of the Medea narrative. Mid-season, the Corps replaced the traditional red jackets with cream-colored uniforms that further stripped the show of visual warmth audiences were used to associating with Star. Brass players leaned at angles that pushed the limits of what marching performers were supposed to do with their body. The show used silence. Actual, sustained, deliberate silence as an instrument, the kind that pulls an audience forward in their seat because the absence of sound becomes louder than anything that could be played. And then, when it finally came, Medea's Dance of Vengeance, the closing movement, Barber's cataclysmic 1955 rescoring of a full orchestra depicting a mother murdering her own children. The Corps opened everything that they had been storing for 11 minutes and then obliterated the stadium. The contrast was not just musical, it was psychological. People described feeling it in their chest. Brass arranger Jim Prime Jr. and percussion arranger Tom Hannum built a battery book around Bartok's use of the Fibonacci sequence, rhythmic architecture based on the mathematical progression 1-1-2-3-5-8, which meant the complexity of the drum parts wasn't decorative, it was structural, embedded in the same mathematical language as the composition itself. This was not a corps adapting music for the football field. This was a corps treating a football field as a concert stage and daring the adjudicators to evaluate it on those terms. Star of Indiana did win the Jim Ott Award for Best Brass 4 consecutive years, from 1990 through 93. They won the Fred Stanford Award for Best Percussion in 93. They had the best music program in the activity by any measurable standard, and they lost the championship. To the cadets of Bergen County by 1/10 of a point. Their visual caption, where the complexity of the show's physical demands had created spacing issues, fell to third. The cadets won general effect and visual. Final score, cadets 97-4, Star of Indiana 97-3. The reaction in the stadium was polarizing. Some of the audiences found Medea beautiful, devastating, unlike anything they had seen. Others found it alienating. Cold, deliberately obscure. One critic argued that audiences shouldn't need an advanced degree in music theory to enjoy a drum corps show. The corps supporters argued back that that's exactly the kind of thinking DCI was founded to push past. Both sides were right. and the tension between them is precisely why this show matters. Here's the pillar argument. I'm going to make all three at once because with this show, they're inseparable. Medea transcended its era because it arrived before the era was ready for it. The integrated body movement, the industrial visual palette, the aggressive use of silence, the refusal to placate the audience, all of it became standard operating language for modern DCI design. Productions we've already talked about in this series, Downside Up, Babylon, are routinely compared to Star of 93 as their philosophical predecessors. When you watch a modern DCI show where the performers' bodies are as much a part of the visual program as the drill, where props carry narrative weight rather than decorative purpose, where a show trusts the audiences to lean in rather than pandering to their expectations, you're watching a tradition that Star of Indiana started in 1993 in Jackson, Mississippi, and didn't finish competing long enough to see vindicated. The winning spirit runs through this show like a live current, but it's a specific kind of winning spirit, not the joy of a corps performing within its comfort zone, but the defiance of a corps performing something it believed in completely, knowing the audience might not follow. That is a harder thing to do. That requires a different kind of courage than cleaning drill and riding momentum to a championship. The 1993 Star members performed a show that confused some people, alienated others, and demanded more from its audience than the activity was accustomed to offering. They did it anyway, every night. 34 shows, 31. And on the night that it mattered the most, in oppressive Mississippi August humidity, they delivered the performance of their lives, and they lost. To a corps that played safer, cleaner, and won the crowd more completely. I want to stop for a moment because when it comes to the timelessness case of Medea, it's not timeless because it's misunderstood. It's timeless because of it. The shows that the activity agrees about in the moment tend to age into nostalgia. The shows the activity is still arguing about 30 years later, that's influence. That's a show that changed what the people who saw it thought was possible. Even when, especially when, they didn't fully understand it yet. Here's the final thing. The thing that makes 1993 unlike any other show on this list. After Jackson, the Star of Indiana never competed again. The staff had already decided, not because they lost, because they felt the competitive format had stopped being the right container for what they were trying to make. So they walked away from DCI at the peak of their powers, voluntarily, and they built something new, Brass Theater, and then Blast. They went on to win a Tony Award for Best Special Theatrical Event in 2001, and an Emmy Award. They brought this activity to Broadway and international stages in a way that nobody had managed before. Think about what that means. The most artistically radical corps in DCI history decided that DCI wasn't big enough for what they were doing. And they were right. The show that lost by 1/10 of a point became the blueprint for the next 30 years of the activity, while the corps that made it went on to win a Tony. The influence of Tom Hannum, Jim Mason, and that entire design staff runs directly through Carolina Crown's transformation in the 2000s and their first ever perfect brass score in 2013. So when I say this is the most important DCI show in history, I mean it in the most literal sense possible. Not the most celebrated, not the most decorated, the one that mattered the most to where the activity went next. The one that looked at the competitive format and asked, what if we built something too advanced for this moment? What if we built for the future? The 1/10 of a point loss is a tragedy only if you think the championship was the point. And if you think the art was the point, then 1993 Star of Indiana didn't lose anything. They handed the activity a new set of tools, walked out of the competition, and let everybody else figure out how to use them. That's not a second place finish. That's a legacy, and legacies, by definition, do not expire. Well, what did you guys think? I want to hear from you. What is your favorite show? Is there a show that you think should have been on this list? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.